don't know about you guys, and we do it a lot this time of year. Thank you, Darren. I love to travel. And the problem with 7 kids is I don't get to travel as much as I would like to travel, but I absolutely love to travel. And there's all kinds of different ways to travel, right? You think about it. I love traveling by airplane. It's a whole lot of fun to go through the airport if you're like a people watcher like me and to just kind of just check the scenery out. And then when I fly, I want a very specific seat. I want a window seat and an exit row. And I want the exit row so I can stretch out my long legs and not be super cramped like it is in a normal seat. And I love the window seat so you can see as the airplane takes off and lands, the changes of the contour of the land. And I love to stare out the window when I'm flying. I don't like to be in the row where people are bumping your arm constantly every time they walk by, but I love to travel. Even by boat. Like growing up, I lived on a small little island. Prince Edward Island, and the only way off the island to the mainland was by boat. We had to take a ferry boat. It was like a 2+ hour ferry boat ride from Prince Edward Island to Nova Scotia, and we get on board, and you drive under the boat, and then they have like arcade on the boat, and a food court, and a mini golf course up top. It was awesome, and I miss traveling by boat. I love it, and I love traveling by train. I've traveled a few times by train, and not like the metro train. I'm talking about like going across country and you get to see the countryside. It's awesome. Probably the only form of transportation I do not enjoy is the bus, right? And when you're a young adult in college and all that kind of stuff, it's probably the way you travel the most because it's the cheapest way to get from point A to point B. So I spent a lot of time on the Greyhound bus. But the problem with the bus is it's multidimensional. One, you get on the bus, you never know who's going to walk onto the bus and sit next to you. And then you're just stuck. And you don't have any idea when the stops are going to be because you're not in control of that. So there you are, for however long, and you just have no idea. So it's cramped. I just do not like traveling by the Greyhound bus. But of all the kind of trips I like to take, the trip I love the most is the family road trip. There ain't nothing like it. Loading up the family in the car, the van, the bus for us, and just hitting the open road. I remember in the 90s, I loved to buy the Rand McNally Road Atlas. You guys remember those? And you would chart out your core, and then you have to flip pages on the steering wheel just to figure out where you're, and that was kind of replaced by MapQuest, now Google or Waze, but there's nothing greater than a road trip. I love road trips. They're awesome because you drive at your own pace, right? You stop when you want to stop. You take in the scenery around you, and of course, there's like the awesome road games that you get to play as you're driving. So I love taking road trips. Now, the problem with me taking road trips is I'm competitive. And so when I drive and I take road trips, the problem for me, it's not that the goal is not to get from point A to point B as fast as I can. That's not quite it. What I enjoy doing when I take road trips is I like to see how far I can get on one tank of gas. It's so fun, and the challenge is awesome, and you have a lot of kids, it gets a little bit challenging. So parents, this is some free advice, and I'm not going to charge you for the gift I'm about to give you, it's because I love you and it's the Christmas season. So if you value that sort of thing, how far can I get? Because the annoying thing, you're in the hand goes up, Papa, can we stop? And we're 30 minutes in, you got to go to the bathroom already. So the first thing that you need to do when you're taking a road trip with your family, if you want to have success in this endeavor, is you dehydrate them the day before. So you cut off all source of liquids afternoon prior. We do it for medical appointments and stuff, so why can't we do it for this reason, right? So you dehydrate them the day before. That's the first thing the second thing that you do the next day when you're driving, when you're actually taking this trip, right? And you do stop and you load up and they get chips and pop or water, whatever. Beverage right away. You time it so that like 2 hours in, 3 hours in, then they get to crack it open because then a few hours later, that's when they'll have to go. The mistake you make is they get in the car, they start drinking. That's on you. Don't complain when they have to go, right? So that's the second thing. So dehydrate them the day before. Time when they get their liquids and when they do not. And the third thing is this, and I did this for years with the kids. So as they were leaving the house, didn't matter if they were in grade school, middle school, high school, didn't matter how long they've been potty trained. I just hold out a pull-up and they grab it and they go. Yes. Oh, I'm just saying, there are ways to accomplish this. Listen, I could tell you stories all day long about some of the fun road trips that we've had. But what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about one of the, I think, most famous road trips of all. And it's from Luke chapter 2. Starting in verse 1, we're going to read that passage together in just a moment. But before then, let's just kind of take a moment and still ourselves and pray. Father in heaven, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. If you have your Bibles, Luke chapter 2, let's start reading together. In those days, verse 1, it says, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to his own town to register. So Joseph also went up from Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for a baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in clothes and placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. I don't know about you. It's just a few short verses. That wasn't a short road trip. To me, that does not sound like a great road trip. We're 2 weeks into this series called The Worst Christmas Ever, and the idea behind the series is that when you dig into the details of the very first Christmas in history, it wouldn't be far-fetched to call it the worst Christmas ever. In a way, because last week we talked about the opening act, right? An unmarried pregnant teenager, a boyfriend ready to break up with her, and all the scandal associated with the Christmas plan that God put in place. And just when you thought the Christmas story couldn't get any weirder, Mary's in her third trimester, and she's forced to take a 90-mile road trip, most likely by foot. And just as they arrive, her water breaks. It's time to deliver because Joseph didn't call ahead of time. All the hotels are booked, and now they have this baby in a barn with no nurse or midwife or doula to get her through it. I mean, if I had not been told the Christmas story since the time I was a little kid, again and again, every December, like if we're reading this for the first time, the details of the first Christmas in history, they probably have your head spinning. Like, wow, man, like when you stack all that up, sounds kind of like the worst Christmas ever. Because it started with the worst news ever, at least initially. Mary, I know you're a virgin, but guess what? Like, here's your calling. You're going to get pregnant. And then to her boyfriend, hey, Joseph, I know you're struggling with the whole girlfriend, somehow got pregnant deal, especially since you've never even kissed Mary yet. And I know you want nothing more than to break up with her, but hang in, pal, and just trust me. It's a God thing. And just when they finally, right, think about this. They're a few months in and maybe started to embrace this new normal. And they've accepted the fact that somehow they have been chosen by God. They're going to birth the Messiah, and maybe their parents are now talking to them again, and they're on board, and they're finally looking forward to this baby coming. They have maybe a midwife picked out, a nursery set up, and since they know it's a baby boy, they've probably got all kinds of clothes already. Right? Everybody's getting on board, and everything was going to be okay. Everything was going to work out fine until Caesar messed everything up. Right? In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken in the entire Roman world. And everyone went to their own town to register. I'm guessing Mary, just guessing, did not receive the news well. When the town crier comes in and reports this to Joseph, and he runs to Mary, he's like, we got to take a trip. Like, imagine that moment, being in that home, like, what? What do you mean? Are you kidding me? A census now? This is not going to work, Joseph. We can't take this trip. You're going to have to go it alone. I'm like 8.5 months pregnant here. This baby could come any day. This is not cool. But the Roman emperor, just so you know, Caesar Augustus was the first ever emperor of Rome. And Luke, who is writing to a Greek audience, is the only gospel writer to actually connect the biblical events to the political history of the time when telling the Christmas story. But Israel was under Roman rule at the time, and Israel is not a big fan of this. But so when Caesar issues a decree, what Caesar says, Caesar gets, and so every male had to go to their hometown to register. And for Joseph, that meant going to Bethlehem, which was about 6 miles outside of Jerusalem, about 90 miles in total. So why would Caesar do this? Why would he issue a census? It's typically, if it happened, was for one of two reasons. Either it was for military recruitment, right? Or it was for taxation. And since we know that the Jews did not have to serve in the Roman army, this was most likely a census that was taken to make sure everyone was registered so that Rome would get its money. And since Jews had to pay taxes, Mary and Joseph had to take this road trip. And so what do? They pack up their stuff and they go. It's that simple. Verse 4, Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, to the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. So just so you know, there are road trips in life you get to take, and there are road trips in life you have to take, right? This is one they had to take. And you've been there at just the wrong time. Something happens. Maybe somebody in your family gets in trouble or gets sick and you got to go visit, or somebody you love passes away and there's a funeral, or maybe your boss comes to you and is like, you know what, at the main office, something went down and I'm choosing you to go fix it, so you got to go. Like, there are times when it's not convenient, when you least expect it, that you have to take a road trip, right? This road trip was not convenient. Not at all. 4 years ago, I was performing a wedding, and I love doing weddings. They're amazing. They're super fun to me. Like, everything about it. And there are people in this room that I've married, like Chad and Michelle. I married them twice. Chris and Corey have been coming. I did their wedding a few years ago. But I love doing weddings, meeting with the couple in the run-up to the wedding, getting to know them and counseling and all that kind of stuff. It's super fun. And then on that day, right, the energy and the emotion, the doors of the chapel swing open and the bride walks through and you can see the groom choking up and all of the words in the ceremony as they seal the deal. That moment, you may now kiss the bride, the reception, everything. I love weddings. Weddings are super fun. 4 years ago, I was at a wedding rehearsal with the kids. So Thad at the time was living in the hospital at UVA Children's waiting for a heart transplant. And so he had to live till he got the heart there at the hospital. So Emily's with him, but I was doing a wedding rehearsal, and as I'm going through the rehearsal, my phone rings. And so I know, because Emily knows I'm doing this, like, just unless it's an emergency, so I'm like, oh no, it's Emily. And so she says these words to me, oh my goodness, you're never going to believe it. Thad's going to get a heart. And I'm like, what? That's awesome. That's awful. Like, the timing of this is so bad. Like, I'm doing a wedding right now, the wedding's next day. And so I asked her this question. I said, so how long do you think till the heart arrives? And for those of you who know nothing about organ donation and how that works, it's a legit question. So just to give you a little bit of insight, because our family's been through this twice, so we already had prior knowledge to this. It can take a few days because the doctors, they have to fly in from all over the country, and they have to see if whatever organ that they have a patient that is waiting for is a match for them, and if it's not, then another doctor will fly in and see if it's a match for their patient, and so on. So this can take 2-3 days sometimes. Then they got to get the organ over to the hospital, and then they're prepping whoever it is. So this can take a while. So when I asked that, like, it actually in context makes a little bit of sense. But so the next day, we did the wedding, and then as fast as we could, we packed up all of our stuff, and we drove to Charlottesville in time for the transplant. This was not a planned road trip by us. It doesn't mean God wasn't behind the whole thing. For Mary and Joseph, this wasn't a planned road trip. That doesn't mean God wasn't behind it. Like, think about it. They were fully prepared for the birth, where it would be, who would assist, everything the baby would need. They probably already had it. Make no mistake about it. They had carefully designed how they would welcome this baby into the world. After all, this is the Messiah we're talking about. You don't think they had every detail planned to the max? Of course they did. And when word came that everyone in Nazareth about the census, and Joseph's like, oh no, we got to go to Bethlehem. I'm sure they were more than a little bit panicked and were scrambling to adjust to the news. And so what do? Not because of choice, not because they wanted to. They packed up everything they thought we might need because the baby might very well come, and they head on this road trip to Bethlehem. And although to them this seemed like an unplanned interruption, the fact of the matter is, this plan had been put in place by God a long time ago. Micah 5:2, the baby would be born in Bethlehem. It's not a coincidence that Luke goes out of the way in verse 4 to record, for instance, that Joseph was from the line of David. Joseph was from the line of David. This is a big deal. Joseph descended from David through Solomon, and that was the chosen line for someone to actually be anointed king. Like, that's a big deal. So Jesus then, think about it, was the son of God and the son of David by biological descent through Mary, and the king of Israel through legal descent of Joseph. Like, he checked both boxes, and even though it may have felt like a great convenience, God was working behind the scenes. His plan was in progress, even when it didn't probably feel like it to Mary and Joseph at the time. And I think there's a lesson in here for you and I, because oftentimes God's at work, even when it doesn't feel like it. What may seem to us like poor timing, or man, that's a bad rap, or that's another unlucky break, is often the plan of God in motion. We just can't see it from our limited vantage point. And maybe for some of you right now, you're exactly where Mary was when she was 9 months pregnant. And here's this news. She had to leave the comfort of her home for a multi-week, 90-mile road trek through rough terrain. And she's looking around probably going, God, are you kidding me? How is this the plan? Because maybe you're looking around at your life, and for all practical purposes, things are falling apart at the seams. At work, maybe, and at home. And you're looking around, you're going, what's going on with my life? And it's the hardest thing as a pastor. When I sit down with someone and the details of their life are a mess, and they're wondering exactly that. Where is God in all of this? And all I can offer them is, I don't know what he's up to. But he's in it. And he's with you. The hardest thing I do as a pastor. And sometimes that's where faith takes us. Do you realize that? Right to the limit, right to the edge. As oftentimes, it's not until the trial is over or the circumstances pass that we can look back and say, okay, God, now how many times that happened? Oh, yeah, I see how you were at work. A lot of times, that's how it works for us. There's actually a poem that for a lot of people has captured that idea of after it's passed, where you can look back and kind of see. And my parents had on the wall of their home a framed picture of the footprints in the sand. You guys remember that poem? I want to read the words of that poem for you right now. I love this poetry. One night, a man had a dream. He dreamed as he was walking along the beach with the Lord. And across the sky flashed scenes from his life. For each scene, he noticed 2 sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to him and the other belonging to the Lord. But when the last scene of his life flashed before him, he looked back at the footprints in the sand, and he noticed that many times along the path of his life, there was only one set of footprints. And he also noticed that it happened at the very lowest and saddest times in his life. And this really bothered him, so he questioned the Lord about it. Lord, you said that once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I've noticed during the most troublesome times in my life, there's only one set of footprints. Lord, I don't understand when I needed you the most, you would leave me. And the Lord replied, my son, my precious child, I love you. I would never leave you. During the times of trial and suffering, when you see only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. My friends, it's with love that I want to remind you, God is with you. God is at work in you and all around you and in the circumstances you're in. And just because the circumstances make no sense to us in the moment doesn't mean God's not in it, doesn't mean God's not behind it, doesn't mean God's not the director. That's where faith enters the picture, and trust enters the picture, and hope enters the picture, not blind hope. Hope in a God who's delivered you in the past time and time again, and a God who will do it again in the future. And when Mary was finally, by the way, able to look back and have her footprints in the sand moment, and all the pieces seemed to fit together, Luke 2:19, Mary treasured all these things and pondered them in her heart. There is coming a day where you will be able to look back, whether it's in this lifetime or not, I don't know, and you're going to see how all the pieces fit together. In the meantime, hang in there and trust God and lean on one another and never lose hope, never, ever lose hope. Back to the text, verse 6. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son, and she wrapped him in clothes and placed him in a manger because there's no room for them in the air. Now, the problem with Scripture at times is it becomes familiar to us, right? And when it becomes familiar, it almost becomes boring and it loses its impact, right? And that's why we need art and sculpture and dance and poetry and music to help retell the story, because we go, oh yeah, I get it, he was placed in a manger. Friends, like, he was born in a barn. A barn. He was placed in a manger, like a manger. That's the trough they fed the animals from. Jesus was a king. Like, that's worst Christmas ever type stuff. That's at least what they had to be thinking. 9 months pregnant, we traveled for days just to get here, and every hotel in the city's booked up, and so we have to stay outside the city in a barn. And as much as we respect Mary for her willingness to be used by God, you have to think that at some point she's looking around going, like, I know I said yes, God, but this is not what I signed up for. I don't know about you. I often fantasize about how I would handle the circumstances that Bible characters found themselves in, right? You ever do that? What would I do in that? Like Daniel in the lion's den. I love that story. Because King Darius issues a decree that only the king is to be worshipped, right, for a period of days. And Daniel's like, no, God's my king. So he still gets down on his knees in front of the window, public view, and prays to God. And of course, he's cut. And they take him out of his home. And the issue had been put, if you break this law, you're heading for the lion's den. Right? And so they carry him off for the line. And he knew King Darius. He was close to King Darius. This was somebody that he was in the inn with. And so I love to imagine, because there's something about that story when I read it, and it seems like there's this unbelievable calm about Daniel. This unbelievable faith and trust. I wonder how, if that was me, like would I go kicking and screaming? Oh, what are you doing, King Darius? You're my bro. You got to rethink this, buddy. Not for me. Like, would I be freaking out? Like, how would I react if I was in that story? Probably so. Or that story. I love the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel. Like, that story where the prophets of Baal, and it's like the Super Bowl of who is God. And Elijah's up there on the mountain, and there's 400 prophets of Baal. And Elijah proposes this deal where we're both going to build an altar, and we're going to put meat on it, and then you're going to pray to your God, and then I'm going to pray to my God, and whatever God answers by fire, that's the real God, right? So you know the story, the prophets of Baal, they build this huge altar, and they start to pray to their God, and they're dancing around. Nothing's happening. Why? Because Baal can't do anything. He's not a real God. And so Elijah sees this, and it's really cool in the text as they're dancing, and they start cutting themselves, and they're trying to get their God to answer. And Elijah starts making fun of them a little bit and poking at them a little bit and doing a little trash talking. Read the text. He says things like, hey, you might want to pray harder. Maybe your God's on vacation. Maybe your God's in the bathroom. Like, he's saying these things. And I love to imagine if that was me, like trash talking, you have no idea what that moment would have been like. I love to fantasize about this in this story, right? The Mary and Joseph story, the baby Jesus. I love to fantasize about what Emily would do if she were in Mary's shoes. Because honestly, I think this is where she would have checked out. Because she and I have different standards when it comes to accommodations. It's true. Like I lived homeless on the streets of Chicago for a time. Slept on park benches and bathroom floors in homeless shelters on mats. Emily stayed at a Days Inn once, and she feels like she can identify with my homeless story. My kids, they can testify to this because they've been on vacation with us, right? As a family, and it's one thing. And then they've been on vacation with just me. So years ago, we took a road trip. When I say we, I say just me and the kids. Emily, I think had like a work thing or something. I don't know what it was, but she wasn't able to go. And so there's something about me. I don't feel the need to reserve a hotel ahead of time. And so I'm a little bit like Joseph that way. Call me biblical if you like. So we take this road trip, and we go to the beach, and we arrive, and I'm trying to find a hotel. So I go to 2 different hotels, and there is no room in the inn. And I'm like, oh, been there, read about that. And so I'm like, we got to find a place to stay, right? So I'm driving, and I see this hotel off the right, and there's a sign in the road that says, vacancy. I'm like, yes. And I look over at the hotel, and I'm like, oh. And my kids, there's where we're staying. And they're like, no, Papa. And I said, yes, look, it has a pool. It has an outdoor pool. And they're like, Papa, we're here for the beach. We don't need the pool. I'm like, just shut up and be excited, for crying out loud. And so we pull in there. I get the key. We go into the room. They wouldn't go near the beds. That night, they all slept on the floors. They were scared of the beds, and the doors wouldn't lock, and it smelled like smoke. And I'm trying to distract my kids from how terrible all of this is. So I'm like, let's go for a swim, right? So we get out into our bathing suits, and we walk out to the outdoor pool, and we all jump in within 5 minutes. I'm not going to say which kid pooped in the pool, but we had to evacuate that. Listen, it was, the reality is, if Emily would have been with us, man, she'd have never stepped foot in that place. That would have felt like a luxurious state to Mary. There was such a crowd that came to register, and this wasn't a family of means that we're talking about. They probably lived well below the poverty line. There's no room left for anyone probably with their budget. And I'm guessing Joe's relatives have already passed away because he's from this area. There's no family that's ready or willing to take them in. So a barn it is, and a manger, and animals, and the King of the world is born in a barn. Mary and Joseph welcomed baby Jesus into the world on the very first Christmas in history, and there's no tree or lights or presents, yet lying in the manger is the best Christmas gift ever given. Don't you just love Christmas? Because what seemed like the worst Christmas ever was the most iconic Christmas of all time. We're still talking about that Christmas today. And the beauty and the birth of Jesus was not found in appealing surroundings. There was no pomp and circumstance, no incense or ambiance. He didn't come clothed in luxury. He came clothed in humility, and he entered the world as a baby, the same way he would leave it as a man, humble and naked, mostly alone, only his mother there for both of those moments. And I think this is where I want to park the sermon car this morning. Soaking in the simplicity and soaking in the humility of the very first Christmas morning. I find myself craving that simplicity right now. I remember the year Soleil was born, because she's a December baby, so she was a tiny little baby at Christmas. I think we have some pictures of that. And when I look back at those, oh my goodness, that's something. When I look back at that room, life was a lot simpler back then. As a matter of fact, we were security residents, right? So maybe you don't know this. Every school in Prince William County, they have this program called security residency. Has like either an apartment in the school or it's like a small building on site, like a small house, and you can live there rent-free, utility-free. Anyone can apply for it in exchange for walking around the perimeter of the school in the morning and night, making sure everything is secure, and just they want a presence on site. And so we had heard about this through a friend, and we applied, and so we got the one at the Brentsville High School. There was a small home right between the school and the football field, a little brick house. It's there to this day. And so we lived in there for a few years. And the problem is there was a two-room house, right? So they had the main open area, which had like kind of a sitting area and kitchen kind of a deal. And then there was a bedroom, and that was it. I had two kids. So I had to find a bedroom. And I'm like, oh, here's a closet. And so there was concrete floor closets. So I put mats down. We're like, ta-da, Dryden has a bedroom. But then we had a baby. And we had to find a nursery. And I'm not one of those, hey, you can stay in my room kind of kids. No, I like sleep. So I was like, we need a nursery. And so we had a pantry. And so I took all the shelves out of the pantry, put a little bassinet, and they were like, ta-da, we have a two-bedroom house. Like, it was awesome. 3-bedroom house. Wow, that's incredible. But I remember that Christmas. Man, it was so simple. We had one tree up. That's it. One tree. And now, if you walk into our house, we have 9 trees up, I think, already. We have lights on the inside now. Buddy and Gus wreak havoc on the house. There's Christmas music playing all the time. On Christmas morning, there's gifts everywhere. And listen, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't do it if I didn't like it. I love the lights and trees and the presents, but I got to be honest, it doesn't feel quite as humble as it used to. It doesn't feel quite as simple as it used to. And maybe, just maybe, I'm tapping into the beauty of the first Christmas in history. Because it was the most humble Christmas in history. And it would set the stage for everything to follow. Because the one born in a humble barn would hang on a humble cross. And would come along then, and guess what? Ask us to do the same. To humble ourselves and pick up a cross and follow. Paul said it this way in Philippians, in your relationships with one another. Have the same mindset Jesus did, who, being in very nature God, he was God, did not consider equality with God something to be taken advantage of. Instead, he made himself nothing, and he, by taking the very nature of a servant, was made in human likeness. Merry Christmas. And being found in appearance of a man, he then humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross, from his birth to his death. The story of Jesus is a story of humility. It really is. Let's ask this question then about ourselves. Does that describe you? Does that describe me? Like if I were to interview people that know me, one at a time, what would they say? Would they say, yeah, Jacques, he's humble, for sure. He's a servant. Oh, yeah. He's not looking for power, prestige, or influence, or accolades, or being popular. He's not entitled or enabled or cocky or arrogant, none of those things, or self-righteous. He's not obsessed about what he looks like or having nice things or being successful in the eyes of other people or getting his own way. Is that how people would describe me? Is that how people would describe you? Or maybe the manger would be below you, or a barn would be beneath you, and if so, a cross, probably not for you. So this Christmas, it would serve us well to slow ourselves down and take a step back and ask ourselves this question: Do I arrive into people's lives the way Jesus arrived into ours, in humility? Do you know what fascinates me about the Apostle Paul? And we're going to be doing a series, a little preview here in January, called The Apostle Paul. Like, literally, that's it. We spare no expense. The life and times of, basically, where we're going to dig into who he is. Do you know what fascinates me about the Apostle Paul? It's these three statements he makes. I'm going to read them for you. They'll be up on the screen. He says this in 1 Corinthians 15:9. He says, I am the least of the apostles. The least of the apostles. Ephesians 3:8, he says, I am the least of all the saints. All the Christians out there, I am the least of them. In 1 Timothy 1:15, he says, I am the worst of sinners. How odd is that? Do you know what blows my mind about these statements? It's when they were written is what blows my mind. Do you know what the approximate dates of these written proclamations by Paul is? So, I am the least of the apostles. I'll share with you. It was written in 59 AD. 59 AD. I am the least of all the saints, 63 AD. I'm the worst of all sinners, 64 AD. Why is that significant? Because as the years passed by, the more time in Christ, the longer he knew Jesus, the lower he went. Do you see it? At first, he's just a new Christian. Oh, yeah, I'm an apostle, but I'm the worst of the apostles. I know Jesus a little bit longer. I'm not just the worst of the apostles. All the Christians out there, I'm a little bit lower than all of them. And then I know Jesus a little bit longer. And I'm not just the worst of the apostles or the least of the Christians. I'm the least of all sinners. The longer he knows Jesus, the lower he goes. Is the same true about you? He sings slower so the Lord can be raised higher. William Beebe, the naturalist, tells this story about Teddy Roosevelt at Sagamore Hill. After an evening of talk together, the two went outside on the lawn to search the skies for a certain spot of star-like light near the lower hand corner of the great square of Pegasus. Then Roosevelt said this statement as they found what they were looking for and pointed up. Said, that's pointed upward. That is the spiral galaxy in Andromeda. It's as large as our Milky Way. It's one of 100 million galaxies. It consists of 100 billion suns, each larger than our sun. Whoa. Then Roosevelt grinned and said, now, I think we are small enough. Let's go to bed. And I have no doubt that as Mary and Joseph tucked baby Jesus into the manger for the night on that very first Christmas, though they, in their circumstances, may have felt small, tucked away in a barn, baby in a manger, God, through the one who made himself small, brought the greatest gift of all, which makes me wonder, what would God be able to do through you if you made yourself, if I made myself just a little bit lower? Will you pray with me? Father in heaven, oh, I thank you for the beauty of the Christmas story. That if we search it deep enough, the truths that we find tucked away in the incarnation of your Son are mind-blowing and life-altering and transforming. So, Father, whatever you have to do, lower me. If I'm not willing to lower me. So that you can use me. So that I can thrive in your plan and in your will. We love you. In Jesus' name.